Now, the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty is held every year on the 17th of October. This year, the theme of the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty is answering the 17 October call to end poverty, a path toward peaceful and inclusive societies. This theme highlights the necessity to preserve the dignity of impoverished people and to support their social integration. The objective is also to raise awareness of the need to listen to people affected by poverty and misery. Well, joining us now to discuss the subject is Program Coordinator at the Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group, Mervyn. A very good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to all your viewers.
Well, let's just start with how you observed International Day for the Eradication of Poverty.
So firstly, I think what is critical is that we recognize that in South Africa, the overall majority of our citizens are trapped in poverty cycles. And so it's critical that we begin to look at pathways out of these cycles of poverty so that more people can experience the dignity that they so richly deserve.
And what would you say are some of the pathways that could be implemented perhaps in the South African context to help people out of that poverty?
So, we release a household food price index on a monthly basis. And we believe that food is one of those critical aspects. Ensuring that every household has sufficient and nutritious food is a critical pathway out of the poverty cycles, because if people do not have sufficient food, it means that they cannot fully utilize the education input. It further means that they would not be able to be economically productive, and so they are continually trapped in a cycle of poverty. And so we need to look at how do we get food into the homes of each and every household.
And just thinking about what the United Nations thoughts are, the UN believes that the poor are often unheard and far from being integrated into programs that are actually aimed at reducing extreme levels of poverty. Is that also the case, would you say, in South Africa?
So in South Africa, that definitely is the case, because poorer people tend not to be as active in social media. I mean, they do not have money to purchase data, so they're not active in social media. More often than not, poor people are not organized. And if people are not organized, they're not able to mobilize and advocate as strongly as those of us who have a voice to engage. However, we do have very strong social movements in South Africa. We do have very strong NGO sector. So that, in a way, does help and assist in getting the voice of poor people into policy debates.
And when we also talk about poor people, we seem to describe just like one homogeneous group with no particular distinguishing features other than the fact that there's hunger and basic services that are lacking. How widespread would you say poverty is in our nation?
So when we look, for instance, at one indicator, and that is how many South African workers are either unemployed or how many South Africans who do work earn the national minimum wage. Now, the national minimum wage for the month of October was 3,653 rand, and to purchase a basket of food for a household of 7 cost 3,916 rand. So we get a sense of the scale of poverty, because more than 60% of those who work in South Africa earn the national minimum wage or below that.
And this issue of poverty and affordability is a very big challenge in the country. You've mentioned some of your observations that came out of your Food Affordability Index this Friday. How sustainable would you say the current interventions against poverty that the government has actually are? For example, the child support grant and the social security income grant.
So one of the things, I mean, we are very happy that the President announced a continuance of the 350 Rand grant for those who are not employed. So that's good, and that has to be acknowledged. However, we are also extremely disappointed that he did not continue the top-ups to the old age pension and to the caregivers and child support grants. And the reason for that is that when we saw a spike of hunger in March, and the top-ups to the social grants were announced in April, we saw a decrease of 27% of hunger and food insecurity in the households of poor people as a result of the top-ups. Now with the top-ups coming to an end at the end of this month, we are bound to see that 27% of households getting into hunger again, and probably deepened because our food basket has increased by 232 rand since the beginning of March. So food has become more expensive and social security will now become less, and that will only deepen the poverty trap that many households will find themselves in.
Now, based on some of the observations that came out from the Food Affordability Index report that you mentioned earlier, what other recommendations would you make to government?
So our first recommendation was that government keep the top-ups in place because the impact of COVID has not yet left us. The impact of COVID is still very much with us. I mean, 2.8 million jobs have been lost, 1.4 million workers have been furloughed. By June, only 700 of those workers have been re-employed. So we are seeing massive, just massive economic devastation at households. That's the first step. The second step is that we do need to begin to invest in the parts of the economy that can quickly get households back into. So, for instance, the top-ups to the grants and Social Security provides money in people's pockets that they can spend at retail level and begin to drive a consumer-led recovery, which in itself will create jobs going further down. And so that would be important, as will be the President's investment in infrastructure development. But we have to get that going very soon, because the crisis is deep and the crisis is present and the crisis is real.
And how soon do you think you can be able to influence government to implement some of these recommendations that you've made, which really are quite necessary at this point in time?
So we are aware that government is doing consultation. We are also aware that government and members of parliament are listening. And so engagements are happening. And there will be more engagements happening before the medium-term budget, which has now been set for the 28th of this month. And so we hope that by the time the minister announces the medium-term budget, that some of these recommendations would have been considered by Treasury.
And just lastly, are you hopeful that one day we will live in a South Africa that has completely eradicated poverty?
I believe that we will, if we are really focused as a country on eradicating poverty and raising not the top but the lowest South Africans. And if we are truly concerned about that, we would have to shift our economy. So, for instance, your previous interlude that you discussed, the food economy, localizing our food systems, but that would ask corporate sector to also change their business models. And I think if we are able to have the private sector and government collaborate together, then we will be able to turn the corner.